Hi, welcome to the Mormon Mixed Faith Marriage Mastermind. We've got myself, Brooke Booth, Suzette Halterman, and Chris Rich. We're each certified life coaches with personal experience being in a mixed faith marriage. We're going to share with you from our experience, both personally and professionally. So we talk about the topic of grief. And I want to define grief as the anguish experienced after a significant loss. And this can include a lot of different things. It can manifest in a lot of different ways. Grief includes psychological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, apprehension about the future, all of these things. You've probably heard about the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Talk a little bit more about these later on. I know that they're controversial because they are originally about the experience of the person dying, but I think we can extrapolate them to any complicated and complex or significant loss or experience like that. And we can talk about that later. I also want to point out one more thing before we really dive in. Grief is big. Like, it's not unusual to take 1 to 2 years to process through grief. So if you're experiencing grief, like, be patient. Be patient. This is not something you rush through or process through one podcast or a weekend or even just a rough month. All right, we're going to get started with our discussion. So grief comes in many forms and for many reasons. Some people grieve the same faith marriage, as I sometimes call it. Some people grieve loss of the church and the community. Some people grieve changes in themselves and their change in their identity, changes in their marriage, changes in their spouse. Some people grieve the fact that their kids will have a different experience than their own. And I want to hear from Chris and Suzette about your grief. Like, how did your grief look like? What did you grieve? How did you work through it? What surprised you or didn't surprise you about your experience with grief?
I'm happy to go for it. I so your first question is, did I have grief? Absolutely. I think that was probably one of the biggest and hardest emotions for me. And and I think you had alluded to that it can take a year to 2 years. And I've found with my experience and what I see with a lot of other people, grief doesn't have a timeline. It's not, and I kind of think of it like I think of it like like a thunderstorm. You can look at the radar and you can see like, okay, we're in the middle of a thunderstorm, and you know that thunderstorm is going to clear up, but does that mean there will never be another thunderstorm? No. We know there will be more thunderstorms. And I think with grief, I don't like to think of it as being like, oh, you've completed this, check. You just went through a grief storm because there are other things that come up and I like to define grief as it's the loss of an expected outcome. So you get through something and then it's like, okay, I made it through that. But then there's a new milestone or there's a new thing. And so it's like I call it a grief grenade. All of a sudden it's like kapow, here is a new form of a new thing, and you're going to experience that. You're going to experience grief again. So I think of it just like a thunderstorm. Would never be like, you know what? I've done thunderstorms and I'm all done with them. I'll never have another one. It's something that comes up over and over again. Uh, so I think and so your other question was, how did you work through it? In the beginning, I didn't work through it. I didn't know what to do with grief. And so I, I, I avoided it. I stayed really, really busy with my callings, with my family, socially. I just stayed as busy as possible because I didn't want to feel it because grief feels terrible. And I cried. I tried to change things. I tried to change my husband. I tried to change the experience. And I spent a lot of my time trying to control other people so I didn't have to feel the grief. And then I also resisted my pain. A lot of it, it was just I spent a lot of time arguing with reality that this isn't happening. He's going to come back. I would pretend that I was fine. And so I never really let myself feel that grief. But one thing I've learned with grief, it is very patient. It will wait until you are ready to feel it. So I spend a lot of time not handling, not feeling or not processing through the grief. And I don't think I did myself any favors because I didn't handle it. And then as we go throughout our questions, I'm going to tell you some of the things I learned later on as to how to handle that grief. But I did a terrible job in the beginning because it just felt terrible. I didn't want to deal with it.
I love all of that, Chris. Grief grenades, I will remember that. And the thunderstorm. I think for me, I think it's interesting. I think that all grief is valid and all grief is different. So, grief from the believing person when they kind of have lost what they imagine their life looks like is a very valid kind of grief. The grief I experienced, well, different as the one who shifted faith. My actually didn't identify it as grief early on. I don't think I would have thought when this first happened to me that had experienced grief. I think there was so much confusion. I had lost my anchor, and it was more and my certainty, and I was trying to find certainty again. And I think there was a lot of confusion and anger, which at the time I wouldn't have identified as grief. Now I know differently that that was all part of grief. Grief is also stress. Like it can be experienced in so many ways. So at the time, I didn't identify it as grief. But like you said, Chris, grief has its own timeline. And now I experience grief years later, which is interesting. At the time, I did experience loss around relationships. Like my relationships changed. And I did experience that as identifiable grief. But now, I will, like just a few weeks ago, there was a grief grenade that hit. I have not cried about my faith deconstruction in a really long time, but I did with that grief grenade. And I think the timeline for my grief is like, oh, now I know what this is. And it's like I'm allowed to, I'm allowing myself to feel it now. I've kind of sorted through everything that now it's like, okay, now it's time to experience grief around the loss. And for me, what I grieve is the loss of respect from people in my faith community, the loss of friendships. My friendships have definitely changed. The loss of a voice in this, because I still attend. So I do experience grief when I'm there because I am not asked to teach, talk, or pray. I love to teach. I'm not asked to do those things anymore. So like there's tremendous losses around being visible, being respected, being able to contribute, and things like that. So I do still experience that currently. Yeah.
As I was thinking about this for myself, when I was like going through the early stages of a faith transition and realizing like I may need to make some changes, I may want to make some changes, I really thought the loss of the community would be absolutely devastating to me. And I had like anticipatory grief around that, but the actual loss wasn't. Like it was very surprising how that wasn't the hardest thing after all. Like where I thought that would just be the worst. There was some relief in that. It really helped me to deepen other relationships and find what I call like actual friendships instead of circumstantial friendships. That was interesting for me just to reflect on. My note's going to be a little. I'm so sorry. It's like nice weather and he's in and out now. It's driving me crazy, but I'll let him out in a little bit here. What I wanted to talk about though is my real grief was similar to Suzette's, like losing my identity as like that Mormon girl, as that good daughter, as that, there is status with that. I also found grief around like realizing that this was hard on my marriage. That it wasn't as resilient as I thought it would be. It wasn't as forgiving as I thought it would be. And that was probably my most powerful grief was around that. So let's switch how we see grief manifesting for clients. How do they grieve? How do you help your clients work through their grief?
Brooke, when you were sharing
I'm
just a
still
minute
on my phone.
ago,
You keep talking.
okay, sounds good. One thing that I think is so important to recognize with grief, as you can see, the three of us had very different experiences with it. And I think that is something very important to understand, that grief is very individual, that it's not going to look the same. We all have different experiences, we have different nervous systems. So grief is going to be a different experience for all of us. And I think one thing also, I didn't realize how I was so focused on my pain and my sadness and my grief. It never crossed my mind that my husband could be having, that he could be grieving, but just a different experience. So I think that's important to to note. But getting back to your question, um, how how does grief show up with my clients? And I think it's important to understand that there are a lot of different types of grief because I and you mentioned one, that anticipatory grief. That's when I have anticipatory grief. With my kids, like I thought they were going to get married in the temple, and knowing that they're not, that is anticipatory grief of something that could be coming up. There's also, I see a lot of disenfranchised grief, and that is like with my own experience, I was really struggling. And my husband was like, I'm still the same person. Why is this a big deal? So disenfranchised grief is when other people they don't see what you're going through and don't understand. You might see that with a miscarriage or something like that too, where it's like people don't understand why it's so hard on you. And uh, I think it's important to understand those different types of grief. And you asked the question, how do we help our clients work through that grief? Um, I think the biggest thing is to learn to allow it and to validate, like, I'm grieving. This is hard. This is not what I expected. And to let yourself have those emotions and to normalize it. It's even if, even if your partner doesn't get it, to recognize, like, you know what, other people in my same situation would probably feel grief in this situation as well. And then just giving yourself that permission to feel it. It's okay. It doesn't mean that you need to stay there and be stuck in it, but it's okay to say, you know what? This is different than I thought it was going to be. And to give yourself permission to feel that. And that when we do that, when we validate, normalize, give ourselves permission to feel, then we're sending a message to our nervous system that it's okay to grieve, that it's normal. It's normal to have grief anytime there is loss.
I love all of that. I would say, how does grief manifest in clients that I work with? Well, people grieve how they lived, like how they live. They grieve and live the same way. So if you were kind of closed off before the loss, faith transition, you might be closed off in your grief. You might actually not cry and talk about it. You might still be grieving and you don't ever talk about it. That's still grieving. Some people are really emotive before the loss. They're going to be emotive in their grief. So you grieve how you live. So it looks different for everybody and their personalities and what kind of who they are. So as far as how do I help my clients work through grief? That is a big question because I did not know how to help my clients work through grief. And what's funny is, I work with couples and even outside of mixed faith marriages, like one part of couples work is, you grieve what you don't get in your, like, is there enough good that you can grieve what you're not getting and be okay? Like that's something I say all the time. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, well, I don't actually know how to help these couples grieve what they're not getting. So maybe I should take a grief course. And so I signed up to take this grief certification program. And then it was in that I was like, oh my goodness, like grief is, I mean, I knew it was a part of mixed faith marriages. Like I felt it, I know that. But it was through that I was like, oh my gosh, there is a lot. This is like all of mixed faith marriages, just grief, 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 grief. And so I learned through that, like how to actually do grief work. And a lot of it has to do with reducing your suffering. Like you can't change the loss. The loss is going to be there. You can't eliminate that, but it's learning how to reduce your suffering around it by making plans. Like, this thing is triggering for me. What can I do? What can I do to make it better and less triggering for me in that moment so that I don't spiral completely out of control? Like, I'll still feel the pain. Pain is one thing, but suffering is another. How can I like create a plan to eliminate, like reduce the suffering? Because the pain, like you said, Chris, like it thunderstorms are always going to come. The pain of that loss will always be there, but how can we keep ourselves safe? So that's really the grief work that I am learning how to do now, thanks to like this course that I took, is really just planning work, like learning what can I do to help myself in those moments.
You know what I see with my clients is everybody grieves differently. Like, this is something we've touched on, and to give them permission to grieve in their own unique way. I mentioned earlier the Kubler-Ross model for grief and how its research was on people that were dying, and it's been often applied to people in grief. And I'm totally okay with this extrapolation because I think it's really about how people respond to complicated and complex situations. So when you look at those things, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, some are emotions that need to be processed and dealt with. Some are actions that we're doing, like bargaining is not an emotion. Bargaining is something one does. So what's the motivation behind that? Are we okay with that kind of behavior? When I say, are we okay? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with bargaining, but the way you're bargaining, is that in alignment with your value system? Do you give yourself permission to have the different phases of the grief process? Because they don't happen in a linear fashion. You don't do this and then this and then this and then this. You can be in a couple at the same time. You might skip one. It's not a precise frame or roadmap. It's like a loose paradigm. That's really all it is. And I think it can be very helpful. I see this with my clients a lot. Grief is very, very common in a mixed faith marriage. What I see with them is once they understand that there's not a right or a wrong way, and that it's going to be a little bit messy, and that it's okay that they feel these things, or they do these things, or that these things are showing up in random ways, and the storms are coming in and leaving, it gives them a lot more permission to just relax and accept what they're doing, instead of being like, I shouldn't be feeling this, or I shouldn't be saying this, or why am I still experiencing this, and just giving themselves permission to just let it be what it is. Okay, I want to talk about grief in some more specific situations. Like, let's just take it a little bit more specific. How do you help clients process grief around not sharing spiritual milestones or traditions or beliefs with their partner? This is one thing people often grieve about.
I think this is where those grief grenades come in. And because it's all, as our kids get older, there's a new situation, there are new things coming forward, and it's like incoming grief grenade. So what I want to share, just like a practical thing that I do with my clients, and that is recognizing, yeah, that was a grief grenade, and just putting my hands on my heart and or giving myself a hug and recognizing this is grief and naming it, having that, just recognizing, okay, this is what's going on for me. I am feeling the emotion of grief, and that it's okay to feel that. And instead of like not letting myself feel it, I want to open up to it and let it just wash through me like a waterfall going through me, and that it's okay. Of course, I'm going to feel grief in a situation where I thought things were going to look different. And and then the next thing is, just letting it. I like picturing like, okay, here it is. And sometimes that waterfall involves some tears, and to have that release and to be able to let that grief go through you instead of damming it up and not letting it, just like, nope, I should be over this by now. I I need to move on. It's been over X amount of years, but just letting that, I love that image of just letting it flow through you like a waterfall, letting it just, here it comes, letting it go. So that's what I do with my people.
I agree with all of that. I think, like I mentioned, a large part of grief is planning, right? If you know that there's milestones or traditions or even just Sundays, if that's going to be kind of a grief grenade, planning for that. Like I'm going to buy a frozen lasagna and have it in my freezer because I don't want to cook. Because when I come home from church, I want to crawl under the covers and take a nap and not like, I don't want to deal with anything, right? Like you make plans to make it easier for yourself so that you can take care of yourself. It's like an example is if somebody has lost a loved one, a child, a spouse, and they go to the grocery store, every aisle in the grocery store is going to remind them, oh, well, that was my kid's favorite food. That was every time I was at the store, I would always pick up this for my husband. Or I remember the time we ate that. Like grocery stores are going to be very like grief grenades. And so, if that was your situation, you might say, you know what, I'm going to do grocery delivery or I'm going to do an online grocery order. So I'm not wandering through the aisles being flooded with all these memories. And the same thing applies to, any of these situations, milestones, traditions that happen is what can I do to minimize my suffering here? How can I change what I'm doing enough so that it doesn't overwhelm my system? So that I can take care of myself. I know one thing that I do, so the Sundays that my husband teaches Sunday school, like once a month, I've realized that those Sundays are grief grenades because that's when he's on like a church high and then I'm like on a church low and I grieve the distance between us. So that's a grief, like I know that's coming. So I know that what works for me is I need to shake that off. Like right after church, I need to have something planned, preferably outside. Like I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to go for a run, I'm going to take my kids up to the mountain, we're going to go for a picnic. I need a plan to shake that off. So if I know that, that helps minimize my suffering. And then there's other things I do. Like I know I don't walk down the aisle at church after he teaches and see everybody like so, connecting with him. Like that's really hard for me. Because I miss teaching. I really miss teaching. And so when I see that, I grieve. So I know like I'm gonna stay in the nursery room, which is where I am, a little bit longer. I don't need to see that because that like I don't need to exacerbate the pain there. So just little planning things like that around whatever milestones, traditions, like how can I minimize my suffering? Like the pain is still there, but how can I make it better for myself? What are my plans for before, during, and after? What's my escape route? What's anything, how can I make it easier for myself? I think that's a big part of it.
I absolutely love like those practical tips you just provided. Suzette, like they're brilliant. It's so often I find as a coach, I'm like we want to prevent or we want to work through things, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have to just have some real practical advice as well. I love it. I'll just offer one other thing, and that is I really work with my clients on letting them learn to be okay where they are. Like if they're feeling angry, learning to be okay with anger. If they're bargaining a lot, learning to be okay with that. If they're crying a lot, learning to be okay with that. Like recognizing whatever it is that's coming up, it's normal and natural part of grief, and that it's okay. It's what I was talking about earlier. So often we don't let it be okay. We don't let like whatever, however grief manifests, we don't let it be okay. We shame ourselves for being angry or sad or emotive or whatever. And so much of working through it is not resisting the experience while you're working through it. So when it comes to like shared visions or family or children, like whatever those emotions are that come up, like this is this part of grief. I'm okay feeling this. Giving yourself space for that. Okay, let's talk about this one. This one's interesting to me. Have family or religious communities contributed to grief?
Definitely. I think that they it's kind of I think there's a lot of little things that people say, like a couple examples. People say, "Oh, just have faith," and you have there's this pressure to stay positive and to, men are that they might have joy, but today I'm grieving and this stinks and this is really hard. So I think there's some pressure to be okay. And I think a lot of times people try to say things in an effort to provide comfort that actually that, things like, oh, you know what? They're going to come back. There's going to be a miracle, or God has a plan for this. And I'm sure, that's coming from the active believing side. And I'm sure there's just as many things on the other, from the other side of that too. But I think that people say things in an effort to comfort you, but a lot of times these things can feel very dismissive and like it's not okay to be feeling what you're feeling. So it's kind of encouraging us not to grieve, but it does, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I think it definitely contributes.
I agree that it contributes. In this grief course, I'm this therapist who's a grief expert, and she works with really traumatic grief and all kinds of grief. And she was saying there's so much judgment in grief because humans desire to be safe and certain. We want to take somebody's situation and look at it and be like, oh, well, I don't do that, so I will be safe. So we judge it like, oh, well, I would never not wear a seatbelt, therefore, like that could never happen to me. And I think that happens a lot in our church, right? People, the way that I've experienced kind of people's reactions to me has been very hints that I know they don't mean to, but it's been very kind of judgmental, like you just must not have been doing this right. And that's why. And I know that they're just doing that because that helps them feel safe. Like, oh, well, then that would never happen to me because I read my scriptures and I go to church every week. So that would never happen to me. And it's a way that they feel safer, but it doesn't help the grieving person because, it's life you can't control. You can't control faith deconstruction at all. You can't control so much of a mixed faith marriage. The other thing is, I think if I could have the ear of all the bishops in the church and just be like, this is about grief. Treat somebody going through a faith crisis or a mixed faith marriage like you would treat somebody who's just lost a loved one and is sitting. You don't try to fix it. You don't start talking about, oh, well, you'll find a spouse someday. And you just sit there and cry with them and hear their pain. And I wish that that's what people could do instead of trying to fix it in any way, because it can't be fixed. It's a loss. It's a loss for the believing spouse. It's a loss for the non-believing spouse. Different losses, but huge. And I wish that there was better grief education around this.
What you two are saying is so fascinating to me because I think there's contradictory messages. I certainly receive contradictory messages. Like I hear like mourn with those who mourn. And then I remember very clearly a story in Young Women's about a woman who got a phone call that her mom died. And then within 15 minutes, the grief was replaced with gratitude and she was like, fine. Like I'm not even exaggerating. Like it's very challenging. I think, Chris, what you were saying earlier about like the pressure to be positive is very real. And these stories imply that if you're feeling sad, your relationship with God is not where it should be, or you're not making good choices, or you're not worthy or righteous. That's really sets us up to have a lot of problems processing the emotions that come with grief. That sets us up to struggle to work through the emotional realities of being in a mixed faith marriage. I think they really do contribute to unprocessed emotions and confusion. And then that just adds more grief to the situation. And so I really feel for people who are struggling through this and trying to, use their past experiences and stories and what people's words and how people talk about it. It's incredibly confusing, and you're going to hear very contradictory messages. And like that does not make it easier. How about this one? Do you think the grief of a mixed faith marriage ever fully resolves? Or is it something that's just like mitigated or managed? So you were talking about this earlier, Chris, but I'd like to talk more about this idea.
Yeah, I have an image that I love. It is, I want you to imagine there, I've got it up, but you know what? I should just share this for the YouTube. Can I share my screen?
Let me, okay, you can share your screen.
Can you see that?
Sure can.
I love this image. And for those of you that are listening to this on the podcast, so there is a jar that has a big old ball in it, and it's a ball of grief. And you can see there, it shows that that ball gets smaller and smaller. So, and it says people tend to believe that grief shrinks over time. And then below that, there are three more jars, but this time the jars are actually growing. The grief is the same size, but the jar is getting bigger. And it says what really happens is that we grow around our grief. And I just love this image because I think it's so, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that. But I think it is such a helpful idea that because I think there's, and I think for the going back to the five phases of grief, I think a lot of times people think, okay, I'm going to go through step one, two, three, four, five, and then I'm all done and I can move on. But I think I love this jar image. I think it's so helpful to realize that the grief is still going to be there. It's still an emotion that you are going to feel. But we build up that capacity. We have more tools as we go through time. And that grief grenade idea that it's not so is this something that ever fully resolves? That's like asking, will there ever be a thunderstorm again? I'm guessing there's going to be more thunderstorms coming my way. So I think it's just something um, we learn to handle it when it comes up, and we grow stronger so we can grow around that grief.
I love that image. I love this quote by Megan Devine. She says, "Grief lasts as long as love lasts." Because grief, we don't grieve if we don't love somebody, right? We only grieve because we love somebody. And so for as long as we love somebody, then we will grieve if there's a loss there. And so, yeah, I don't think that grief fully resolves because we will always love our kids and we want certain things for them. We will always love our spouse. And so we want certain things for them. And we will miss the things that aren't there, miss, the things that we would have loved to have with them. I think that's normal. But I think the pain, so the pain of grief may always be there because we will always love these people, but the suffering can be minimized. And I think that's a lot of what that visual image that you showed, Chris, demonstrates is our capacity to get the support we need, our capacity to, utilize our own coping skills and access different ways of managing and living with this grief. Those capacities in us grow to be able to live with this grief so that we're not suffering in it.
I like to consider that grief and this, like the correlating emotions, there's always so much stuff and actions and all this stuff around that. They're not problems to be solved. Right? Like a lot of times we want to attack grief or healing like we would like taking a cancerous tumor out of our bodies. Like it needs to be cut out. And I think when we do that, we really miss the mark. And that's sort of this idea of like getting something fully resolved. It's this idea of like fully eliminating and having it be cut out of us. Emotions, these experiences, they're not problems. They're part of what makes us human. They are fundamental to the human experience. They're fundamental to being in relationship with people or institutions or identities or ideologies or whatever. And I think when we make them problems, that's when we need to cut them out and eliminate them. But when we see them as just part of our humanity, part of our lived experience, we have more space to let it be. I'm realizing I skipped over one question and I want to go back. Like we talked about How do you help clients process grief of not having a shared spiritual milestones and traditions? I want to talk about this other one too. It's similar to that. And so I'm going back a little bit. Stick with me, guys. But I want to talk about how you help clients or yourself cope with the loss of like a shared spiritual vision for your family, for your children. Like I chose these two because these are two that I see common with my clients. They're frustrated about the milestones and traditions. And I think we talked like I liked your comments a lot on that, but I want to talk about this piece of like my family is now fundamentally different. There can be so much grief around losing the expectation of what a family should look like and how children should be raised. Really like to talk about that too before we wrap up.
Well, I think it's so important. I'm going to be church lady, but well, I'm always the church lady. But when we're baptized, we make a covenant to mourn with those that mourn. And a lot of times we don't let ourselves mourn. We don't let ourselves mourn what has happened in the past or what's currently going on. And there is going to be a mourning for the future as well. So letting ourselves that, like when you're looking at that shared spiritual vision, to be honest and vulnerable. So I think there's a lot of it's very powerful to journal and just say, you know what? I kind of thought it would be fun to go on a mission with my husband, and that's not going to be happening. So letting yourself mourn those things um, that may not be in your future, and to be honest and vulnerable, to um, also talking to someone, being able to talk to a coach or a therapist and just say, you know what, I'm bummed about this. It doesn't mean you have to stay there forever, but I think it's really important to admit those things that are hard and to let yourself go there and to validate. Again, I said this earlier, but to validate, normalize, and give yourself permission to feel those things. And because if we just pretend that everything's fine and dandy and we don't acknowledge what is hard, that's I don't think that's helpful either. So I think it's important to let yourself, to be very honest and vulnerable about, yeah, this probably is not going to be happening, um, and to acknowledge that.
I think for me, that question just made me think about my own family, and what came to mind is COVID. Like when you lose your shared vision as a family, when you lose that vision of who are we as a family, and um, you lose your sense of family identity, and you don't know like who are we as a family? Are we a church? We're not really a churchy family now because not every, but who are we? And I was reminded of during COVID, a lot of our family kind of identity developed from that time during COVID when everything was shattered. And we had to kind of cope out of survival. Like, how are we going to make it through this? So we would identify, like my kids would all agree, like we're a camping family, we're an adventurous family. That came through COVID. Out of pure need for sanity, I decided I was going to take my kids tent camping for like overnight once a week just because I needed to do something other than sit at home. And that became part of our identity, and my kids loved it. So, all of that is to just show that even when things are shattered and horrible and you just want to survive, you might stumble across something that works that's like, oh, this is cool. Maybe, and it might just naturally evolve into, oh, this is who we are as a family. Like so many of our traditions and our family identity actually came from COVID and just trying to stay sane. So the same might be true. Your identity is shattered right now as a mixed faith family. Who are we as a family? We don't share the same vision. Who knows what might come out of that, right? Like I wouldn't wish COVID on anybody, but some great things came out of that for our family identity. So I wouldn't wish a mixed faith marriage situation on anybody, but you might be surprised at what evolves as you are just open to this. Okay, like we don't share the same vision. Who are we as a family now? I don't know. Let's try some things out. Maybe we're going to become like a sports family. Maybe we're an outdoorsy family. Maybe we're just a game playing family. Like what else can we create an identity around that might feel different, but who knows what good might come out of that. I don't know if any of that made any sense at all.
Sure does. We're a taco family.
Oh,
My kids and I, we like to find new taco places.
definitely.
And that's new. That's new.
Mhm. Love it.
And I think with that, I mean, there's like we're an ice cream family, but also we are a respecting family where we have different beliefs. And I think that I'm sure there would have been, if we would have all been on the same page with religion, respect could come in different ways, but that's definitely something. There are definitely things that we have learned because we do want to respect and show love. And we've definitely grown because of this experience. There's so many. And I do want to add with those thunderstorms, it doesn't mean you're going to be feeling grief all the time. They're going to come and go. And have I had a lot of thunderstorms? You better believe it. And I've had so many sunny, beautiful days, or you get rain sometimes, or different things. There are a lot of different emotions, but there are definitely lots of sunny, beautiful times with that. It doesn't last forever. They come and they go.
The thing I want to emphasize is that there were never guarantees in your family anyway. I think one of the biggest fallacies we fall for is certainty on how our kids are gonna, like how they're gonna turn out, the choices they're gonna make, how you're gonna feel about your parenting. Like these things are like there's not guarantees in this, and a lot of times the grief around like having a different type of family than you thought you were going to have is because we're latched on to these like this is how it has to look, this is the guarantee I need, this is the certainty I need in this. And that's like I know we've talked about this before, but it's a very rigid way of looking at your family. There's no adaptability there, there's no flexibility there. And I think that's a lot of what Suzette talking about with COVID and things. Like it forced us to be flexible, like or else we were just going to break. It forced us to find different avenues and different ways of relating to each other or having activities together or things like this. Like the taco thing. This is a very new thing between me and my kids. We have a lot of fun, slowly but surely visiting every single taco place like within a reasonable distance of us. If we're going somewhere, we will go to the taco place. Now, mind you, we only get like the ones with cilantro and onions. We're not getting like the other kind of tacos, just so we're clear. But it's fun for us. It's fun to do that. And if we would be rigid, and if we were to say like, no, we always are going to have to be a pizza family, like we're never going to have those opportunities. And I think that's what I love about mixed faith marriages or COVID or whatever it is we learn how to let go of that need for certainty or that false sense of a guarantee. Okay, let's go to our very last questions as we wrap up. This is a general catch-all, like what advice do you give that we haven't talked about yet? What's something that you just want to throw in there for people to consider to mixed faith couples navigating grief?
Well, I think the big thing is to understand that it is normal. It's okay to grieve. And the longer we pretend that we're not doing it, the longer it's just going to wait patiently until you're you're going to go through grief of some sort. So I think it just if we can be like, okay, here it is, and to be okay with it. And Suzette, one thing that you said that you liked having a plan, I think it's important. I know like on the day that my son goes back, my son's home for spring break. I know the day that he goes back to school, I'm gonna miss him. It's I'm gonna have some grief when my kid goes back to school. So I plan on it. I know, you know what? My job description the day he goes back is to be sad. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm probably gonna cry. And when I give myself permission to do it, it it goes that grief flows through me so much quicker than I'm like, nope, I'm fine. I'm not going to cry. Everything's good. If I just say, you know what, it's your job description to cry today. So I think let's plan on some grief. It's okay. Let yourself feel it. Let it go through you. And then you're going to get to sunshine. You're going to have sun and storms through all of it.
I love that. I think my advice would be the couples aspect for it. Because we're all in our grief, we're longing for somebody to hear our grief and our pain. And your spouse cannot be the person to do that because they're also experiencing their own form of grief. There is a very real thing of grief Olympics. My grief is more valid than your grief, and your grief is not valid because of this and this and this. Like if you would just read this, then you would see that you don't need to think that way. Your grief is not valid. And that is just a recipe for being hurt. Grief turns to suffering when it's not heard and validated. So if your spouse is also grieving, they're not going to be the person to do that to you. Also, they care about you. So if they feel like they contributed in some way to you grieving, they're going to try to defend themselves and justify and make you feel better. And no, like it's okay. And that doesn't feel like you're being heard. So I would give up on the notion that your spouse is going to be your grief support person and understand your grief. They're not, because they're dealing with their own grief and they want you to feel happier. So they're not gonna be able to do that for you. Have your own grief support group. Find people who are grieving in similar ways as you. Like if you're the believer, find other believing people who are grieving similar things. If you're the non-believer, find other non-believing people so that you have a similar grief experience in some way, even though all grief is different, but so that your grief can be heard and validated, and it's a safe place for you to express it. Because when it's heard, often it kind of, like Chris, you said, it kind of goes through you. When your grief is heard, it has a way of kind of dissipating. When it's not heard, it becomes suffering and angst, and all kinds of hard and anger. And I think that's also a big part of mixed faith marriages is it's hard to find places that are safe to express your grief around and so it leads to suffering because in fact I asked this question in one of the Q&As in this course. I said, what about grief that's like loss of faith? And she said the biggest thing you'll run into is it not being seen as valid. Like nobody died, so the biggest thing you'll run into is finding places to hear your grief and have it be validated, because it will often be seen as not valid. And I thought that's exactly what happens for both believing and non-believing.
Yeah,
Like,
that's that
we see
disenfranchised
all of
grief.
you. Yeah, it's the same idea. And I want to just like say that to you listening. Like we see you. We know this is real grief. We like hold this space with you because it is hard to find like that empathetic ear. I interrupted you, Chris, but you want to talk about disenfranchised grief because it really dovetails perfectly with this.
Well, I was just saying that's exactly what Suzette's talking about, that you want to, when people, like I tell my friends, yeah, my husband doesn't go to church, and they're like, okay, big deal. They don't get it. Or, so having people that get it, that's what disenfranchised grief is, that grief that other people don't really understand. It's like, well, why would you grieve that? They didn't die. They're still just fine. Or they may be saying that same, I think I mentioned this earlier, that my husband was like, I'm still the same person. I just don't want to go to church. And so, yes, that's true. And that's still, he was like, why would you be grieving about this? And it's like, because it's ripping my heart out. So that finding, yeah, that's what disenfranchised grief is.
So my last piece of advice is to be really gentle with yourself and others, but let's focus on yourself first. I think most people I know are actually pretty gentle with others. We're often less gentle with ourselves. So be really gentle with yourself. As you're developing your awareness around what grief even looks like for you or feels like for you, that takes time sometimes. You need to be aware before you can really process and work through it. Like we've talked a lot about how to process and work through it and all of that, but if you don't even realize you're feeling it or that grief is what you're experiencing, that's when you need to be gentle with yourself and just develop the awareness, the relationship with yourself of what is your experience when you're feeling grief. So different for everybody. So if you watch a movie and somebody's experiencing grief, that does not mean that's going to look at all like how you experience it. And a lot of times we talk about grief in very stereotypical ways. And so it can be hard for us to recognize our own grief, because we may not be grieving like the person in the book or on the TV or at the pulpit and fast and testimony, because we have all seen that. It may look very, very different. And so when I say be gentle with yourself, I mean, not just as you work through it, but be gentle with yourself if you learn about it. And as you are learning that that's something you're experiencing and how it is for you. And then be gentle with yourself as you work through it and process it. And be gentle with yourself as you try to find outlets and support and work through it. And be gentle on yourself when you don't do it very well. Be gentle with yourself when it takes a while. And be gentle with yourself when it comes up again. It seems easy to say that, but it's hard to be gentle with ourselves sometimes. We get impatient with our humanity, while at the same time our humanity is such an important part of who we are. Okay, thanks for joining us and talking about grief. We will meet again with more topics about mixed faith marriages.